We've all heard the stories of war, the generals, the grand strategies, the decisions made in imperial capitals. But history isn't just made by men staring at maps. It's carried out in dusty provincial offices by men whose names are often erased, men who received an order. In 1915, during the chaos of the First World War, the Ottoman government decided to solve its Armenian question. The order that went out from the Minister of the Interior, Talat Pasha, was for deportation, a quiet word for a brutal reality. Governors, the valis of the empire's provinces, received the telegrams. They held the power of life and death over hundreds of thousands of their neighbors. Some delayed, a few refused, but many enforced the orders with a chilling efficiency. They signed the papers that emptied towns and filled deserts. But what happens when the war ends? When the empire collapses and the architects of destruction are suddenly fugitives in their own land? We're going to look at 5 of these men, 5 governors who signed the orders, 5 fates sealed by their own ink. If you value documented history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. And let us know in the comments which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources like the Ottoman Military Tribunal records published by Vahakin Dadrian in Judgment at Istanbul, the analysis of authenticated Interior Ministry telegrams by Taner Akçam in his book Killing Orders, and first-hand consular reports from officials like America's Jesse B. Jackson stationed in Aleppo. Now, back to the story. Number 1. We start not with a killer, but with a man who said no, or tried to. Hafiz Ahmed Cemal. In 1915, he was the governor of Konya. You need to understand Konya. It was a historic city on the vast Anatolian plateau. But more importantly, it was the geographic bottleneck of the deportations. It sat at the junction of the Anatolian and Baghdad railways. Convoys of Armenians driven from the north and west, from cities like Izmit and Bursa, were funneled through its vast arid plain on their way south to the Syrian desert camps. It was a preordained death march, and Konya was a critical station. Cemal was an experienced administrator, not a fire-breathing ideologue. He saw the first convoys arrive in May 1915, starving, sick. Stripped of everything they owned, the official order was relocation due to wartime exigencies. The reality, he saw with his own eyes, was organized extermination, and he pushed back. He used the official channels, sending a flurry of telegrams to the capital, to Constantinople. He reported that the deportees were arriving in a miserable state, and that 90 to 99% would die from starvation and disease if conditions weren't changed. He directly challenged the pretense of the operation. He tried to provide them with food and shelter, instructing local officials to distribute bread. He allowed thousands of skilled artisans and professionals to remain in the city, arguing to the Interior Ministry that their skills were essential for the local economy and the war effort. He even tried to set up orphanages for the thousands of children left behind when their parents died on the road. Talat Pasha, the man at the top, was not pleased. The central government of the Committee of Union and Progress, the KUP, saw Kemal as a dangerous humanitarian. A problem to be managed. They sent agents to watch him. They sent telegrams directly to Konya's police chief, bypassing the governor completely. The message was clear. You are an obstacle. One of the most aggressive KUP delegates, Nazım Bey, was sent to Konya to speed things up. Clashing directly with Kemal, Nazım complained to the capital that the governor was showing compassion and undermining state policy. A telegram from Talat on July 16th, 1915, is brutally direct. He scolds Cemal for his sentimental feelings and reminds him the goal is the definitive elimination of the Armenians from the Turkish vital space. Kemal was stubborn. He argued back that the spectacle of death was having a terrible effect on the local Muslim population, who were becoming demoralized by it. He wasn't just arguing on moral grounds, he was using the language of administrative stability, trying to find a reason that the hardliners in the capital might accept. It didn't work. For his defiance, he was removed from his post on October 3rd, 1915. Transferred to a position of less importance in Damascus, he wasn't shot, he wasn't imprisoned, he was simply swept aside. His career was effectively over. His fate shows you 2 things. 1, that an individual with courage could resist, could save some lives, even if only for a short time. And 2, that the system would not tolerate it. The machine was designed to crush not just its victims, but any gear that refused to turn. Number 2, the man who faced a judge. His name was Mehmed Kemal Bey. In 1915, he was the district governor. The Kaymakam at Tikrit of Boğazlayan, a district in the larger province of Yozgat in central Anatolia, a region of fertile plains dotted with dozens of Armenian villages. Kemal was known as a zealous and ambitious official. When the deportation orders came down from the provincial governor, he did not hesitate for a second. He organized the columns with ruthless speed, but he went further than the orders required. He armed local irregulars, gangs of Circassians and Kurds known as Tsaits, to escort the convoys. The escort was a lie. Survivor testimonies later described how these gangs, under Kemal's direct authority and sometimes with his personal encouragement, systematically robbed, raped, and murdered the Armenians from the entire district. He worked closely with the head of the local gendarmerie, a Major Tevfik Bey, to ensure no one escaped. The convoys leaving Yozgat were infamous for their brutality. Entire villages were wiped out within miles of their homes, their bodies left in ravines and riverbeds. After the Ottoman Empire surrendered in October 1918, the new government of Sultan Mehmed VI, under immense pressure from the victorious allies occupying Istanbul, began a series of military tribunals to prosecute war crimes. Kemal Bey was one of the first to be arrested. His trial, part of the larger Yozgat deportation cases, began in Istanbul on February 5, 1919. The courtroom was a scene of high drama. For the first time, Armenian survivors, veiled women and hollow-eyed men, took the stand in a state court to testify against their tormentors. One witness, a man named Hamayak, described how Kemal Bey watched and laughed as his men murdered a group of deportees. A woman named Shushan testified that Kemal had ordered the burning of a church filled with women and children. The evidence was overwhelming. The court saw telegrams he'd sent, boasting of his work and requesting more cleansing. On April 7, 1919, the military tribunal, led by a judge known as Nemrut Mustafa Pasha, found Mehmed Kemal Bey guilty of murder and massacre. The verdict was death by hanging. 3 days later, on April 10th, he was taken to Bayezid Square in Istanbul. A wooden gallows stood waiting in the public square. A huge crowd gathered. He was allowed to give a final speech in which he declared himself a martyr for the Turkish nation and shouted, "My only crime is my boundless love for my country." Then, the trapdoor opened. The nationalist press in Istanbul immediately began a campaign to portray him as a hero, a patriot unjustly condemned by a puppet court. But he was one of the very few high-ranking Ottoman officials to be tried and executed by their own government for their role in the genocide. For a brief, flickering moment, it looked like real justice was possible within the system. His body was left hanging for 3 hours, a warning, but a warning that would soon be forgotten. If you value documented history that digs this deep, please consider subscribing. It's the best way to help us continue making these videos. Also, let us know where you're watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel. Now, let's get back to it. Number 3, the butcher who ran, Dr. Mehmed Rashid. He was the governor, or Vali, of the Diyarbakir province in southeastern Anatolia, a region historically known as the heartland of Armenian and Assyrian civilization. This was a place of ancient Christian communities. Rashid was a physician by training, a graduate of the Imperial Military School of Medicine. He had served as a military doctor in the Caucasus and in Libya, but he was also a fanatical ideologue, a core member of the SIAP, and a firm believer in a brutal form of social Darwinism. He saw the non-Turkish populations of the empire as a disease that needed to be surgically removed. When he took control of Diyarbakir in March 1915, he began his work immediately, even before the official deportation laws were passed in May. He didn't just deport, he annihilated. He told his associates that the Armenians of his province were more audacious than elsewhere. So a harsher method was needed. Rashid created his own killing squad, a so-called Committee of Investigation, staffed by 50 hardened criminals, including the notorious Circassian bandits, Cherkez Ahmed and Halil and Nazim. He released them from the central prison specifically for this purpose. He used the feared Teshkilat Mahsusa, the special organization, as his enforcers. Unlike in other provinces, where the pretense of relocation was maintained for a time, in Diyarbakir, it was undisguised slaughter from day one. He also expanded his targets. The official orders were against the Armenians, but Rashid, on his own initiative, applied them to the province's other Christian communities, the Assyrians, the Syriacs, the Chaldeans. The event known to Assyrians as the Saipho, the Year of the Sword, was largely his handiwork. Convoys were marched a few miles out of the city and killed in pre-dug trenches. Men were rounded up, tied back to back in groups of 10, and thrown into the churning Tigris River. The German consul in a nearby Mosul, Walter Holstein, reported seeing bodies and human debris floating downriver for days, so numerous they clogged the riverbanks and fouled the water. Rashid pioneered methods of killing with a chilling clinical detachment. He experimented with injecting children with morphine overdoses. He tested the effects of nailing horseshoes to the feet of his victims. He boasted to colleagues that he had resolved the Armenian question in his province in a way that was definitive. He claimed to have personally liquidated over 120,000 people. When the war ended, Reshid knew he was a marked man. He was dismissed from his post and summoned to Istanbul. He was arrested and imprisoned in the Bakira Bulu prison, awaiting his turn before the court-martial. But he never faced a judge. On the night of February 6, 1919, he staged a daring escape from the prison. He went into hiding, moving between safe houses. For weeks, he was the most wanted man in the capital. The police finally closed in on him in the house of a friend in the Gedikpaşa neighborhood. As they stormed the building, Mehmed Rashid, the doctor who had become a mass murderer, put a pistol to his head. He pulled the trigger. His last words, written in a suicide note published in a newspaper, were defiant. "My deeds are for my country. I did what I did for the salvation of the fatherland." He had cheated the gallows, but not his end. Number 4. The man who met his assassins in Berlin. Meet Mehmed Cemal Azmi, governor of Trebizond province, a thriving cosmopolitan port on the coast of the Black Sea. Before his post as governor, Azmi was a lawyer and a dedicated member of the CUP's Central Committee. He was an educated man, but he harbored a deep animosity towards the region's large and prosperous Armenian population, whose economic success he resented. When the deportation orders arrived in the summer of 1915, he followed them with a unique and sadistic cruelty. He rounded up the Armenians of Trebizond, first the men, then the women and children. Some were sent on the traditional death marches south, into the harsh Pontic mountains where they were ambushed and killed. But for many thousands, Azmi devised a different fate. He declared that they would be sent to the port of Samsun by sea to make the journey easier and safer. He requisitioned boats and barges, loading thousands of people, mostly women and children, onto them under the watchful eyes of the gendarmerie. Once the boats were far out on the Black Sea, out of sight of land, the Turkish crews, under Azmi's orders, executed their true mission. They either scuttled the boats, opening the seacocks and abandoning ship, or they simply murdered their passengers. Men, women, and children were clubbed to death and thrown overboard. Some were tied together and tossed into the water to drown. The American consul in Trebizond, Oscar Heiser, witnessed the roundups and reported the chilling accounts of the mass drownings in his dispatches to Ambassador Henry Morgenthau. He called the province a gigantic slaughterhouse. An Italian consular agent, Giacomo Guerini, reported seeing the bodies of drowned children wash up on the shore. Azmi became known for this method. Drowning was his signature. When the war ended and the Allies were closing in, Azmi, along with other high-ranking perpetrators like Talat Pasha and Enver Pasha, fled the country on October 2nd, 1918, aboard a German torpedo boat. He was tried in absentia by the Istanbul court-martial in 1919 and sentenced to death, but he was safe. Living under an assumed name in Berlin, confident he'd escaped, but the survivors had not forgotten. A secret Armenian group, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, organized Operation Nemesis, a covert mission to hunt down and assassinate the architects of the genocide who had escaped justice. On April 17th, year 1922, two of their operatives, Arshavir Shirakian and Aram Yerganian, tracked Cemal Azmi to Uhlandstrasse, a busy street in the Charlottenburg district of Berlin. He was walking with Bahadin Shakir, the head of the special organization and another prime target. The assassins, who had been shadowing them for days, saw their moment. They walked up to them in the evening light. They drew their pistols. Shots rang out. Both Azmi and Shakir fell dead on the pavement. The assassins melted into the crowd and escaped. For Cemal Azmi, the man who used the sea as a mass grave, justice didn't come from a court. It came from the barrel of a gun, thousands of miles from the shores he had stained with blood. Number 5. The man who got away with it all and thrived, Mustafa Abdülhalik Renda. In 1915, he was the governor of Bitlis, a remote mountainous province east of Diyarbakir with a large Armenian population. Born into a Circassian family, Abdülhalik was a career bureaucrat, a graduate of the prestigious Civil Service Academy in Istanbul. He was known for his efficiency and his loyalty to the CUP. Like his neighbor, Rishid, he was exceptionally thorough. The massacres in Bitlis and the nearby Sanjak of Mush were swift and total. The region was home to the legendary Armenian town of Sasun, a symbol of resistance for centuries. Abdülhalik Renda was determined to crush it forever. He used a combination of deportation marches and on-the-spot massacres, using the mountainous terrain to his advantage by sealing off valleys and trapping the inhabitants. He orchestrated the destruction of the ancient Serb Karapet monastery in Mush, one of the most important spiritual and cultural sites for Armenians, a place that had stood for over 1,000 years. Abdülhalik Renda was methodical. While the killing was underway, he was busy with paperwork. He took careful inventories of all seized Armenian property, houses, farms, shops, goods, bank accounts, and meticulously transferred them to the state treasury or distributed them to local Muslim notables. It wasn't just murder. It was a massive, organized theft, conducted with the precision of an accountant. When the war was over and the British occupied Istanbul, Abdülhalik Renda was arrested. He was identified as a major perpetrator and, in 1919, was exiled to the British colony of Malta, along with over 100 other senior Ottoman officials suspected of war crimes. It seemed his career was over, that a trial before an international tribunal was inevitable. But it was just a pause. He was never brought to trial. The Malta exiles became a bargaining chip. In 1921, they were all released in a prisoner exchange for British soldiers who had been captured by the new Turkish nationalist government led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Abdülhalik Renda returned to Anatolia a hero. He immediately joined the new government, and his career skyrocketed. He became Minister of Finance, overseeing policies that finalized the transfer of Armenian wealth to the new state. He served as Minister of Education. Most significantly, he was elected Speaker of the Turkish Grand National Assembly 5 separate times, holding the powerful position from 1935 to 1946. When Ataturk the founder of the Republic, died in 1938, Mustafa Abdülhalik Renda, the governor who had depopulated Bitlis, served as the acting president of Turkey for one day until a successor was elected. He lived a long, comfortable and respected life, dying of natural causes in 1957. There was no trial, no assassin, no suicide. For him, the reward for mass murder was a seat at the head of the table. The trials in Istanbul, which had condemned Kemal Bey, sputtered out. The rise of the Turkish nationalist movement made them politically impossible. On March 31st, 1923, the new government in Ankara passed Law No. 334 Ars, a sweeping act granting full amnesty to all those accused or convicted of crimes during the war. The doors of the prisons were opened. The files were closed. The handful of convictions, like the death sentences in absentia for Talat Pasha and Cemal Azmi, were formally overturned. The court records were hidden, scattered, and for decades, their very existence was officially denied by the state. The men who had signed the orders, who had organized the convoys, who had profited from the destruction, were welcomed back into the fold. They became bankers, politicians, and civil servants in the new republic. The system didn't just forget, it protected, and it rewarded its own. A young Polish-Jewish law student named Raphael Lemkin followed these trials and their collapse. He was horrified that a man like Talat Pasha could order the deaths of 1 million people, and there wasn't even a word in the law to describe his crime. The failure of justice in 1923 is what started him on the path to coining a new word for the crime of destroying a nation. He called it genocide. The ink dried, the graves were lost, and the state remembered its own.